Hey guys, we're doing the C3 framework. We're going over the overview, obviously, and dimension 1 and 2 of the framework.
I'm Ina Mauricio.
I'm Zoe Fox.
I'm David Yaroshevsky.
Javier Vargas.
And I'm Denise Cortez.
All right, so the C3 framework overview. Here is a brief statement from the website. It's college, career, and civic C3 social studies state standards is to provide guidance to states on concepts, skills, and disciplinary tools necessary to prepare them for college, career, and civic life. The C3 framework is intended to be used as a tool for teachers to use as they upgrade their state standards, and it provides assistance on key skills and concepts students should master as they progress through school.
So dimension 1 has to do with developing questions and planning inquiries. It asks the teacher to create just a pertinent, insightful, engaging question that can really provoke the interest of your student and really spark their curiosity as well. And hopefully that question will allow them to draw parallels between the question and how it affects their own life in the community around them. So there's two types of questions. There's compelling and supporting. Compelling question would be an example of that would be like, was the American Revolution really revolutionary? It kind of looks at the question from like a macro level, while the supporting one is more content based. In the example question would be like, what were the implications of the coercive acts or the Townshend acts? Some questions that you might want to ask about a compelling question is just, is it intriguing? Is it intellectually honest? And will it get under the kid's skin? Is it interesting? Is it something that they would want to engage in and answer in? And the supporting question just builds on that compelling question and is something, a supporting question is something that you could answer in like one single lesson, while the compelling question is an overarching question.
Before we start talking about the compelling and supportive questions, students will have to understand what a helpful source is, because especially in today's age, there are so many different resources available to students. So one other issue that Dimension 1 discusses is determining what helpful sources will be for students. Some of the things that we have to keep in mind are, what are the points of view? So we should be asking, who wrote this? When did they write it? Why did they write this? The structure of the explanation about what the content is also important for students to start looking into. Especially with history, we need to consider what types of sources are available for that time period. So we need to educate students on how they are looking at these texts and how they are addressing the questions using these sources, and why were these sources created at the time. So what are the uses of the sources that they will use? One key thing that I found from this Dimension 1 with determining helpful sources is not all sources equal evidence. We should be teaching students that sources have different levels of evidential proof, so we shouldn't just have them cite everything. We need to make them understand what a good source is and what a bad source is.
Okay, now jumping on to Dimension 2, here is where the students actually apply these concepts, and the C3 framework basically provides concepts and skills and not content due to the fact that different states teach different concepts. It also serves to organize curricular content and provide standards that should be met at each grade level. Students might use their experiences to answer some of the questions that are asked in some of their assignments. Another key point is that they are going to investigate questions through disciplinary and multidisciplinary means. They will use primary and secondary sources to have evidence when answering a question or supporting a claim. The framework would like students to ask compelling and supporting questions, which we already talked about in Dimension 1, on each in their subjects, not just history, but other subjects as well. As mentioned before, this Dimension 2 framework serves as a frame for organizing content and not describing what should be taught. Finally, it allows flexibility so that teachers in other states can use this framework and can use it to fit their class or specific area.
So Dimension 2 is split up into 4 subsets. The first one is civics, and it is the study of how people participate in governing a society. And within that category, it's split up into 3 subsets: civic and political institutions, participation and deliberation, and processes, rules, and laws. The first one, civic and political institutions, you just really want the student to be responsible and effective citizens. So you just want to illuminate some of the important institutions that compromise their government, as well as the principles and ideas it was founded on. And you just want them critically thinking about the role of citizens and your relationship between the government and in your community. And the second one, participation and deliberation, talks about the importance of civic virtues such as popular sovereignty, the social contract, and democratic ideals espoused by Enlightenment thinkers like equality, democracy, honesty, liberty, yada yada. And it just wants them critically analyzing U.S. documents to understand the many arguments that were made on both sides. And then the final one was the processes, rules, and laws. And that one focuses on governments and how they run and just like the inner workings of a government and how it creates a society. And just students want to think like experts in their field, so they should be able to know how all those processes, rules, and laws work within a government. Yeah.
The next subject area is economics, and it's basically wanting students to have good decision making based on knowledge and all things involved in economics, not only having to do with money, but other decisions as well. One is, for instance, if a student is considering college, do they have the resources to attend? What is the cost, benefit? Or if they want to attend a concert, is the cost of the ticket worth it? Should the money be spent somewhere else? What about the time? Is there any homework due for school? What is the cost besides money? Students should be able to ask these questions when making decisions in their daily lives, and these are just basic concepts, basic questions, but also other knowledge that they should know is regarding to human capital, land, investments, money, income, and production. Students should also have an understanding of how global economy affects our local economy as well.
All right, the next subset is geography. When we're teaching geography, we want our students to be aware of their surroundings, not just locally, but within the state and also within the United States and as well globally. So by doing so, there is 4 subsets in geography. The first one is geography, representation, spatial views of the world. That is dealing with students looking at maps, looking at certain regions through the usage of, like, let's say Google. Within that, students learn about where they live, why they live there, and would they want to stay there or move somewhere else. So just being aware where they live. The next one will be the human environment interaction, place, regions, and culture. You know, for example, living in San Diego, we're so close to the border, so there is a lot of interactions with people that come across. So there's a lot of goods and ideas to move around. So just having students being aware about where we live and why we get certain goods and why there's certain prices about certain goods we buy. So putting in economics. The next one will be human population, spatial patterns and movements. So telling students about, like, oh, why do we have this amount of people living here in California? Like, why do most people want to migrate to the West or the Sunbelt states? The next one will be global interconnections, changing spatial patterns. So this is dealing with climate change and dealing with, like, when there's earthquakes, hurricanes, like when this happens, like why do we get certain aid or don't get certain aid? So just having your students become aware of all these geographical changes.
Okay, so the next part of Dimension 2 is history. And so in this section, students should be able to move beyond simply asking about the who, what, when, where, and towards the why and how of events and developments. There are 4 subsets to this: changing continuity and context, perspectives, historical sources and evidence, causation, and argumentation. Since chronological thinking is about understanding continuity and change over time, and due to the interpretive nature of history, it is necessary for students to understand that people's perspective of the world is based on their points of view, which can change over time. And it is also necessary to understand that past perspectives will be different from today's points of views. Historical inquiry is achieved through close analysis of primary sources, and the students should focus on their different features, which include the author, dates, relevance, context, and their credibility. Historical thinking uses evidence and reason to understand the chain of cause and effect are not predetermined, but rather contingent and unexpected, and historical arguments used the acquired evidence to address issues of change over time.
Connecting all of these different subsets is the English language arts and literacy Common Core connections. Some of the connections and some of the benchmarks for all of these subjects include reading standards. In the reading standards, we should be educating students on reading for close meaning, main ideas, finding details, focusing on structure, the purpose, different source types, and we should also have the expectations that these answers will be backed by evidence and the texts we use will be appropriate levels of complexity. The writing standards go into research process. With all of this discussions, especially with the inquiry-based, we should be providing space for students to share ideas in an academic setting and be able to express their own views. And then the language standards are domain-specific words and phrases. For example, virtue, fiscal, spatial, and perspective. And some Common Core connections would be the use of analysis, argument, evidence, and questioning.
So there are both implications for the C3 frameworks. So it's meant to provide guidance to teachers on how to incorporate different concepts and skills into their different subjects. In our case, the social sciences. So for instance, we've talked about using evidence and resources when students are making arguments and doing the writing. When it comes to resources, we found that SHEC, Stanford History Educational Group, provides a variety of U.S. history and world history lesson plans, and they also have some civic lessons as well. Crash Course is also a useful tool that teachers can use since it provides educational lectures, and they're also entertaining. Some critiques that we have regarding the C3 framework is that it's difficult to implement on a daily basis on top of our content standards, literacy, and ELD standards. Also, it only focuses on concepts and skills, and thus it lacks content-specific standards. And also, if a student is already behind on their specific skills, it's hard to have them catch up with the rest of the class. And it also does not incorporate different differentiations for specific groups of students.
Thanks.